Good morning. Welcome to the Letterman Legends podcast. I'm your host, Chris Myles. Thanks for joining us today, and happy 4th of July week. When you guys hear this, it'll probably be in the midst of your 4th of July celebration or afterwards, but we want to wish you a very special and safe 4th of July. We'd like to see you guys back next week with all 10 fingers. If you're listening on one of the streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, we ask that you please kindly drop a follow for us so that you never miss an episode. And if you like what we're doing here at the Letterman Legends podcast, we ask that you also leave a review and let us know how we're doing. This podcast overall, we want to leave this as almost a hybrid platform. So we'll have guests come into the show, interview, tell their stories. That's kind of the best stories we like. But we also will cover some on our own for, those athletes favorites that we have that unfortunately are no longer here or just don't want to get on live and tell their stories. So, either way, we'll keep the bus rolling there. But if you know anyone that may like this type of podcast, please feel free to share it with them. We welcome them with open arms. The first episode, I had already actually recorded it. You guys, if you're watching the live recording on YouTube, then you can probably see my face. But I already had this episode recorded and decided to go back and redo it upon the new information regarding Chris Johnson, player from my childhood and youth that inspired the game for a lot of athletes. That was recently came forward with his diagnosis with ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, which was a bit shocking to hear because as athletes, you kind of are always an athlete in mind, so you do what you can do to stay in some type of shape and do the right things with the right things in your body. And, to see, kind of seeing that, life is still going to happen to you kind of shows some of your mortalness that it can happen to anybody, so it's kind of, it's sad to see because you can be on top of the world one day and then, battling from day to day with health issues coming out of nowhere. He had no family history of this, so just want to send a special prayer to the Johnson family. I know he has little ones, his wife, things like that, and other athletes out there that are suffering in silence out there. That's kind of why we do this, is because we want to allow those stories to be told. You never know what life has in store for you, but sharing that story or making the world aware of who you are and the certain things you did within your life. And you never know, you may inspire to make it out of a situation or go forth in a situation to better them. You never know, you may touch. So that's kind of the reason we wanted to start this platform. A lot of people are dying with and leaving this world with things that they're battling or maybe have overcome that somebody currently may need to hear. So I wanted to give a platform for athletes and people of that walk. So yeah, just wanted to kind of come back and pivot there with a new episode, because today's episode is actually about my story, and I had something similar growing up. So I think I've touched on everything, so I can go ahead and get right into it. So at the age of 2, I was diagnosed with Kawasaki disease. Back then, at that time, we're talking probably 98 is when the first symptoms arose. So I had skin rashes and swollen lymph nodes and things like that. And back at that time, there was no AI or search engine to put this information into that you could kind of get a list of things that might be causing it. You kind of had to just treat it as such. So rashes, get a cream for the rash. Swollen lymph nodes, hope that it kind of goes away. Stay away from things that might inflame it. But until you had to go to the hospital, so fortunately, my mom was in medicine, so she was able to kind of notice, something wasn't right with me, and promptly get me in there for a early diagnosis there, and which actually didn't turn out to be an early diagnosis, because even the doctors were a bit stumped, because with this being a Japanese disease, it wasn't too common in America, especially at that time. It's still rare to this day. So the fact that she, got me in at the time she did probably helped save my life there, but just starting off, it was definitely a challenging time, and rightfully so. My parents were a little bit more hesitant about letting me start certain things because as far as like strenuous and physical activity. So we kind of put a pause on, a lot of things growing up. It kind of took a little bit more convincing for me to get out there, from my dad, convincing my mom that it would be okay, but it was an all around effort with that. So moving from there, we eventually got it, treated, and, but you do have the heightened chance now after overcoming that you have with it being an attack on your blood vessels, heart problems. You have to monitor that going forward. So they didn't want to really play around with it, and I always actually joke with them about it now because around that time they didn't know, so they have this VHS of me on Christmas of '98 where I am, opening. I had like my whole side of the living room, full of gifts because they were like, this may be his last Christmas. So unfortunately it was not, but it was crazy. And I was just, can you imagine as a parent, they're buying gifts and they don't even know if they're like kind of just buying them to make it special for me. They don't know if I'm going to be there to even be able to play with the gifts that they're getting me, for too much longer. So yeah, this disease it was eating me up. Needless to say, my parents said it was eating me in front of them, and it was scary to watch. So having to work and take care of two other kids at that time, still cook dinner and proceed like everything's okay when you don't know, it took a different level of strength I could imagine. So yeah, but moving forward, I made it out of that situation, and I felt better, so I was ready to move on with life. And so just being a kid at that time, the main thing you wanted to do was go outside. Outside is where it was happening. I know nowadays things are a lot different, but kids that day, all your friends were outside. You wanted to, get out there and play with them. So, they allowed me to do that for the most part because I had older siblings, so they're outside. So they're almost like, how can we keep it, and allow them to go out? So I would go out, and sports was my thing. First thing I was like tied to. That's what was going on. But with that, it kind of puts you in the mindset where you learn to play a little bit of everything. So it wasn't just like you went out every day and you played basketball. You had certain friends who played certain things. So you would, if you had a friend that played soccer, you played soccer. You had a friend who liked to play baseball, you played piggy or things like that. So you had to, and if you wanted to play, you had to kind of develop your skills in such a manner that you got chosen. So in me having had Kawasaki, I was tiny. That kind of stunted me for a little bit. I lost like 20 pounds when it happened, and I didn't have too many pounds to spare to begin with. So when it came time to like play games, I was not the standout guy that like my older brother was. He's like 3 times my size. He was like twice the size of the kids his age, so they'd always pick him up or whatever. So I had to find a way to, circumnavigate that selection process, So what did I have to do? I had to learn to improve and work on my own game and make myself valuable to the people that wanted to put me on their team. So maybe I'm not last. I can become second to last or third to last, and kind of work my way up to the first pick kid. But it wasn't going to happen just off of God given what they gave me. I had to work at it, and that kind of kick-started that mentality for me. It was kind of like, okay, you want to play with the big boys or you want to be a part, you got to put in the work to do so. So that kind of opened up the door there. But it got to the point where we were playing, that was just kind of the thing to do during the summers. During the school year, there wasn't much to do. So, of course, during the school year is prime time for football. My dad being a big football fan, he played in high school at CVS, and he had this super huge trophy that he received. And I would always see it. I was like, I want one of those. It was just the coolest thing to, kind of be recognized for something that you did. I was like, and I can do it for playing these sports that I love. It's always wanted one. Me and my brother, we just wanted our own trophies, but we weren't going to get that playing in the neighborhood. So we needed to find a way. So I thought I had to wait till high school. Well, one day my dad was driving around and he saw like a flyer on like a poll, I guess a light poll that was talking about this team in South Holland called the Jets, South Holland Jets. Shout out to the Jets. So my brother, being the big kid he was, my dad's like, and him being my dad's first son, he's like, oh, we're going to definitely give this a shot, you know, see what he can do. Well, unfortunately, football isn't one of those sports where you can just throw the kid out there if they don't want to play, because it's a surefire way to get injured. Fortunately enough, my brother didn't get injured. You know, he had coach that kind of saw that he was, you know, his heart wasn't really into it, so they protected him and they didn't really put him in too many situations, you know, to get hurt. I guess I can say that. That's the clearer way to say it. Or in layman's terms, they put him on the bench. All right. He was not given the opportunity to play, you know, but this kid stuck it out, though. I remember there was a practice. We were just sitting in the car watching him get rained on. And he's just on the side. He's not getting snaps in practice. I'm sorry, dude, for putting that story out there. You are always a superstar in my book. But, yeah, he's getting rained on. And he's 8 years old at this time. Can you imagine? You know, and my dad was like, you know, I don't think he asked, but it was kind of like, you're playing football, so, you know, you're not quitting. You know, you started it, you're finishing it. So that kind of set the tone for sports going forward. For me, I kind of knew once I put it out there, like, if it goes left, I'm stuck in this. The only reason I remember being in the car when it was raining is because if it was not, I was out there. So I would be sprinting back and forth with the team and making sure that I showed my parents that I was ready to go out there next. You know, so the season concludes, you know, I'm asking, you know, can I play? My parents are still like, no, dude, you're too small. You know, we don't need you going out there and, you know, passing out there. They don't know what's going to happen. You know, I get first time I can come into any contact. So not knowing that I'm playing that at the park, you know, with kids in my neighborhood. So I'm like, no, I can do it. You know I can do it, but I don't want to tell on myself. So I'm like, no, I can do it. They're like, no. So I was 6 at the time. So the whole year, my brother didn't come back. So the year I was 7, the whole summer, I'm asking, and I'm getting on their nerves, I'm sure. But they're like, no, you know. And then eventually I guess it got to the point where that next summer, just leading up, I don't know exactly when it started. So I would have probably started asking in March. But the season wasn't until like August, September. So they're over it now. They're like, look, at this point, they're tired of me bothering them. So they're like, if he goes out there and he gets knocked out, you know, whatever, you know, we'll live with it. We just want him to stop bothering us. So we get around football season and they sign me up. And I barely made the weight. They probably my mom probably put her foot on the scale behind me just so I made the weight. But, yes, I ended up making the team, paying to play on the team, and I get my equipment. And my dad, being a defensive guy, he's like, hey, look, he took me to the side. He's like, look, you're playing defense. You know, defense is an attitude. You got to want to tackle or you'll get hurt, you'll get ran over, and all these things. He put all these things in my mind at this age. And I'm like, so he probably saw me like contemplating it, like it's an attitude. Like, how do I tap into that? And he's like, basically look at it like this. He's like, when that runner's coming your way, the running back, he's like, if he gets past you, he kills your mom and your little sister. He told me that at 8 years old. Traumatized me. So I'm like, what? You know, my little sister like 2 at the age, like I had been. That was my girl, you know. So I'm like, man, you know, like I can't let that happen. I was like, yeah, get through to my mama then. No, I wasn't. It wasn't like that. But no, I was like, well, I can't let that happen, you know. So I would like be stressed, man. Every time somebody ran my way, like it was ridiculous. But what he was, and I know it sounds like cruel at the time, but he's basically instilling. And I'm gonna try and break down everything he does because in the moment it may sound crazy, and it sounded crazy to me too. But what he was doing was, as a linebacker or as a defensive guy, that is my job, you know, to make the tackle, you know, bring the guy down, stop the ball carrier, and you do whatever it takes, whatever you got to do to get you psyched up to do your job. You find a way to do it, you know. So it wasn't necessarily that I got to have to that drastic, but I think he went that drastic because that was the only way my younger brain was going to know what to do. So he put that into me at age of 8. So practices proceeds, and I think the first tackle I made, he was there. First time we were hitting practice. And prior to that, actually, he told me the whole thing, like, your family's going to get slaughtered if you miss a tackle. So one day, prior to us going full pass, because you would have there's a period you have to go through where you can't wear equipment or tackle. So he's showing me how to put my pads on because he works during the day usually. So he's teaching me. It's like a Saturday. I just got my equipment and I'm excited, I just want to walk around the neighborhood with these pads on. I'm probably looking like a goofball, but I don't know how crazy I look because I'm a kid. He's showing me how to put my equipment on, and he's in his work uniform, so it must have been during the week then. And he tells me, all right, he like had me dressed, he had me come in the front of the house, I'm thinking he's going to make me work out or whatever. And he's like, I want you to tackle me. And I'm like, I'm not going to get in trouble, like, he's like, no, tackle me. And this guy, like, literally, he had my older brother, like, hand him the ball, like, on a dive, like a halfback dive. Like, he's like, I want you to tackle me. So I'm like, this dude's huge, and I'm this little wiry kid who, is barely hanging on. I just got healthy, and I'm like, dude, like, no, like, I can't tackle you, And he's like, it's gonna happen if you don't. I'm like, I'm gonna get a whooping now. It's like, no, what the other thing I told you? I was like, okay. So he proceeds to, they hand him the ball off, and I just go at him. I'm like, whatever. So I go to tackle this guy, and I'm like trying to like remember what I saw on Waterboy, when he picked the guy up, and that's all I knew about tackling. So I try and pick him up, it's not happening, and I'm wrestling him down, and I guess he just wanted to see enough effort, from me that I was like determined to tackle him, and he goes down or whatever, plays it off. But what that did in that moment was that it was his way of showing me that things are gonna appear difficult. There's gonna be these obstacles, these barriers that look like you can't get around. It might be too high to overcome, and you may think you stand up no chance. Attack it the same way you would attack anything else. And he's like, don't let fear override you. He's my dad. He could have gotten mad. He could have broke his ankle and not have been able to work for it. Like, a lot of things could have went left. I could have gotten hurt. But I had to put all that to the side. That was my job. That was my task at hand, was to do that in that moment. So just, yeah. And I think it was bigger than just the job. It was just like, things are going to be daunting. You're going to have running backs who are huge, bigger than you, that you got to tackle. You got to find a way to get down. So that kind of, once that was done, that gave me unlimited confidence. And I think that was his goal anyway, because he's like, you tackle me, you can tackle any of those kids. So that's kind of the mindset I took into the season. So it was just the gym that worked out, but in that moment it seemed, terrifying. Nevertheless, I'll be honest, but it kind of taught me to get over that fear. Like, you can feel it, but it's go time. You're in the moment. You don't have time to kind of sit on that. So so that season, we had a good season. I ended up being a starting outside linebacker for the next 4 years until my varsity season. And I had great coaches. I'm naming this one the coaching point of view because you'll see it come together. This the other side of coaching. But yeah, great coaches, and then they're the reason that I do, and was even moved to even give it a go coaching, because I had some great coaches growing up that made me enjoy and appreciate the game for what it was. But my dad was my first coach, though. And all these things that have helped shape me into who I am today was because of him. So my varsity year, I get to move up, and this is I'm in 8th grade now. I'd been starting, we had won a Super Bowl my Pee-wee year, so I was pretty decorated coming up. And I get to varsity, and there's a coach on the team whose son plays a similar position that I do. Now, off back, I had played with his son in the past, but he moved up to varsity prior to myself. So he didn't play that year, but it was kind of expected that he was going to play. But, I'm thinking, okay, they'll find a way to fit him in there. I'm out of the two of us, I'm better than him, and I'm not saying that because I have a mic in my hand. Like, I was the better athlete, the better player. So I wasn't expecting anything to change. Well, that's when I got introduced to the political side of the politics in football. I get to we practice the entire season. Well, of course, right? We practice the entire off season, and I am starting. I'm the starting linebacker. And then we get to the game. And at this point, my grandparents are my biggest fans. They've been talking to me about what I'm going to do that season, how's the team looking, things like that. So they're excited. They can't wait to the first game. And the first game comes, and they ask them, and I don't know why we even did this, because it's not like we had, certain schemes in play, or, that we watched, film on the other teams or anything like that. Like, what's your back four going to be? What's your four linebackers going to be? Because you ran a 4-4 defense. So for those that don't know, that's 4 linemen and 4 linebackers behind. That's the base defense. So he calls the 4 out, and I'm not in the group. So I've been starting all through practice, so I'm like, why are we, so the game goes on. I probably got like 5 snaps that game, and I'm pissed, and we lose, so we're in the huddle, and when you're in the huddle and you lost because it's the fault of the coach, how difficult it is to sit there and listen to them, give you that rah-rah story afterwards when like, we could have won if I was out there, or at least it would have been closer. So after the game, I go to my parents, I find them, and my mom's like, what happened, She's being a mom, so I'm like, I don't know. Like, I had been starting. She's like, yeah, I'm at the practices. Like, I see you starting. My dad the whole time, he's just stoic. He's not saying anything, just walking and listening to me talk, but he's like not paying me any mind. And my grandparents are asking me like, yeah, how I beat that joker up, all these country, I get on that joker, I was like, man, I'm mad though. I'm like, anything can go at this point. I'm ready to lead a team. I'm like, this is a waste of time. That was kind of humbling for me, because, I had always expected that I was going to start, so I never really knew what it was like to sit out and watch the game, so I kind of put myself in those kids' shoes. I was probably unsympathetic to a lot of them, that was sitting over there, they had to do that game in and game out that I never really, acknowledged or, even thought about, because that just wasn't the life I was living. So it was definitely humbling. And, you kind of see, that, it takes a lot more character to sit out there and watch your team, play without you, go on without you, than it is, being out there and making the plays and things like that. So I'm walking to the car, and like I said, my dad's not saying anything. So we get in the car, and I'm heated. I'm like, what? Like, this was abrupt. I don't know why this is, but I'm better than his son. Like, I want to lead a team. And my dad's not saying anything. I'm waiting on him to give me, because I can't quit. So I'm waiting on him to be like, it's okay to do so. And he kind of like just looks back at me or whatever. And my mom's like, I'm not going to be taking you to practice, doing all this stuff, if you're not going to be playing, if they're going to be doing you like that. I'm like, yeah, that's fair. And my dad's like, once again, he's not saying much at all, but I now know, why he wasn't saying anything, because it was a hostile, emotional situation. I'm responding off of emotion. I'm in the heat of battle from football, so I'm amped up, I'm wired, and I'm upset. I'm ready to do something, I want to do something. I'm not channeling it in the right way. I'm, wanting to, give up, and subsequently give up, and not think like, cause I moved teams, I'm not giving up, but it's quitting on what the thing I set out to do. My thing was I was supposed to be paying for this team on varsity, and making my way from there. I've been playing there for 4 years prior to that. So it was, that was kind of like what I signed out to do. So my dad was kind of showing me like, look, you might be in situations, where, tensions flare up, and, you maybe move to, tap into that side that's maybe a little bit more illogical, because the game was over, we had lost, it wasn't much me trying to fight the coach, or, punching a car seat is going to do, it's not that I punched the car seat, but I would have got myself punched doing that. He wasn't having that, but just being upset and frustrated, and wanting to, hit somebody. My dad's like, no, you don't respond emotionally, and he was letting my mom, do her part because that's what she's there to. She's there to help with that. That's her suit to kind of like match me. Be the soft to the cold or whatever. Kind of like, but letting me know like I'm being heard. But he's like, I'm not finna play into that. That's how this happened, you move on. We need to find a solution. Like, why aren't you playing? You getting up here and getting worked up and me getting mad with you. I'm at the level of you. You're a kid. I'm the dad. I'm supposed to be leading you and showing you how to be a man and, how to respond in society when these situations occur. So he's like, him doing that for me wouldn't have done me any justice, in the situation, and I later found that out. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was like, as a man, this stuff's gonna happen. So yeah, so we get home and he hadn't said anything, but he came to me and once I got through, and he asked me like, how did I practice that previous week? I said, same way I've been practicing. I looked good. I was out there starting. He's like, okay, I'm gonna talk to the coach, and I was that. He asked me, had I calmed down? I was like, yeah. And he's like, all right, get changed or whatever, and he's like, I'll talk to the coach. So that week comes, and my dad never takes off work. Like, he never, but just him doing that, you kind of can see how important it was to him that I guess this is back when he still trusted me, trusted what I said. But he never takes off work, so he comes up there to the practices, to one of the practices, and he waits. He doesn't do it during there. He's not trying to make a scene. He waits till practice concludes, and then he goes to talk to the coach. The coach is over there, and the coach is bombastic. He's a loud guy. I think he was you could tell he played football. He's a big guy. And, but his son just wasn't that. And I think he was living through his son and wanted him to, be this player, but he wasn't. But he's going to try and make it, And that's when I learned a lot of times, no matter what you do, if the quarterback's dad is the coach, and he wants his son to be quarterback, it's not much you're going to do. You're coming off that bench, unless you have the appropriate parents, So I kind of teach from both sides. Parents, be involved in your kids' athletics, but also know your kid. If you know your kid's not the guy, don't jeopardize your team for it, for your own gratitude. That's selfish, and it's selfish to the kid because the kid's not growing at all either. He just thinks dad's going to be there to, help pull him through the ranks, and that's life's going to eventually catch up. You can't pamper your kid through everything. And I was getting these lessons growing up, though. I wasn't getting picked up, to play at the park and, the neighborhood basketball games and things like that. I had to actually work on my craft and get better, make myself valuable, that when the opportunity came, that I either showed that I was, worthy, or I didn't play, and I couldn't go home and cry about it. My parents weren't going to do that and like hit the lab, become better, So, but yeah, so my dad talks to him. He comes back to the car and, they don't fight, unfortunately. I wish I had that to add in there that they did, but they didn't fight. They talked it out, and my dad gets in, and then he says like these 6 words to me. He's like, they're gonna let you play Saturday, and I hope that's 6 words, because if not, I'm the donkey of the day. But yeah, let's see, whatever. That's what he said though. That was his phrase. I shouldn't even try to do that. Like I knew it. He said they're gonna start you Saturday. So I was like, okay, pressure's on. He's like, yeah. He's like, I put my name out there, so, don't make me look bad. That was it. And I think, and up until this point, he had been, like I said, he was my first coach. Prior to football, I had just enjoyed the action of working out and, the fitness thing. I was a big Rocky fan as a kid. So, it was Rocky 3 was the one I really loved, where he faced Mr. T, Clever Lane. And they had the Eye of the Tiger scene with the music rolling, and it was getting it, They had to take Rocky to the hood to teach him how to fight, somebody, a black guy. So, and Mr. T was in the trenches. He was out there doing his pull-ups and stuff. So I enjoyed the essence of just like the art of working out, getting your body ready. So my dad saw that, and he would, he in the summertime, he would train me, have me doing all types of stuff, and running bleachers, running the track, I didn't touch a football training for football, He just had me in like the best conditioning ever. And it would show on the field, kids are just coming off of drinking Sunkist and Faygo Pops all summer and hopping on the field. And I was in there training like I was finna go into, my max contract year in the NFL. He started me, he didn't play around. So I was being great shape. And funny enough, with the Eye of the Tiger, a little story, before every game in like my little league back then, we're talking 2005, he had a Razor. For those old enough, he had a Razor phone, and that was like the iPhone of the time. And back then, you had a limited ringtones, and they were all like generic. Well, even the popular ones were, if you heard it today, you would be like, what was that? But you would have to, if you wanted like a certain ringtone, they would have the commercials where they put like the 10 top charting songs or whatever, and they would have like in a ringtone version. So like, let's say back then, like Beyonce or whatever, then and have your other genre of like country and rap. You have like 10 you can pick from, and they'd be like 99 cents, and they would like send it to your phone, and that's like the best audio you're going to get, buying it. But some people like record it off the radio and make it their ringtone. And now you think back on it, like how corny is it, to have your phone ring and you got Elton John playing on it, shout out to Elton John. But it's like who wants to hear that, But my dad had a ringtone. It was like 30-second ringtone, but it was the Eye of the Tiger song. And it was so funny. Before every game, he'd call me in his room, and then I'm just like always naturally just like calm demeanor. I don't never look too stressed or, bothered, in certain situations. But he would call me in there. He was old school, so he's used to you like, he's watching at that time Ray Lewis and all those linebackers. Great time for linebackers too, by the way. But it's like they're hitting their head against the wall and things like that. And I would just be like, all right, it's game day. Like, let's do it. On the field, I would like lock in, like turn up. But it was like, leading up to it, I'm like, it's nothing to be doing right now. What am I showing off for? But he wanted me to get amped up, so he would play this little ringtone of Eye of the Tiger on his phone. And that was like elite stuff. We thought, and then he'd just give me this phone and he'd be like, you know what to do. And he'd have me play it, and then I just like listen to it on his little Razor. And he, and that would be it. But it was like, that was to get me amped up. And I'm like, the game's not for another 2 hours. Like, are you going, like, I'm supposed to just roll on this 30-second clip for 2 hours or whatever? But it was just funny. We thought that was our little ritual. And if I ever had a bad game, he'd be like, did you listen to the song? Did we do that week? We got to make sure we remember next week. It was just funny. But, yeah, so fast forward, it's game day. He told me, he's like, practice the same way you practiced before. Like, don't try and go over, the top or whatever. Do what you've been doing. And, don't let up. Something cool, So we get to the game day. And, of course, it's the week that we play a great team. Like, I just kept getting the worst luck. The first practice he go to, we're tackling. And I got to tackle a kid. And then and I never tackle nobody, with equipment on, or a kid that had played football before, besides like the neighborhood. Like, and I'm trying to tackle in the neighborhood. I'm probably going against 13-year-olds at that point. But I'm attempting to tackle them, but it's like one-on-one I had to like tackle. So first time he comes to practice, I have to tackle. Now I'm in a position where this first game, he's there, that I'm starting on varsity, and I learned very quickly on varsity, these kids aren't going down when you blow on them. You gotta actually bring them to the ground. So the game comes, and we're going against one of the better teams. They got a great running back. I mean, he's probably best in the conference. It was the Matson Bears at that time. So it's probably 2007, 2008. So if you're listening and it happens to be you were a stud. And they had the colors of like the Chicago Bears. So from afar, it looked like you finna go against the Bears. And it was definitely, cool to see, but also intimidating when you're out there, because you're like, who am I playing? Their uniforms kind of, it really popped. So so the game comes, I start. And I guess the other team had realized, like, look, that's not the same guy from last week. Let's run at him and see what he got. So first play, Everybody then came back out again from my family. So everybody, and they're hot. They're like, you need to, show them what they missing. Like make them regret not putting you in the game. I'm like, yeah, that sounds good and all, but y'all not out here. But I had trusted up until that point. Like I had put the work in, and I was established. Like I said, I was a 4-year starter, and I was leading the team in tackles 3 out of the 4 years. So I'm like, you know what to do out there. Don't even doubt yourself. So I get the first play. It's a toss to me, to my side. I'm like, oh my goodness, And I mean, it makes sense, run at the guy. You don't know if he can play or not. It's just like my childhood all over again, So they run the toss play, and right when it hits the running back hands, everything goes into slow motion. So he's running, you see him running, and they have a lead blocker, a fullback coming out, pulling. So his goal is to take me out of the play, because now it's just one-on-one with the corner who's not, put in a situation where they got to tackle as much as a linebacker. So that's the one-on-one they want. But my goal is to keep it from getting there, and I'm supposed to force it inside. So I go engage with the fullback, and this guy gets low. I'm like, oh, man, he's a pro, He's driving me. And I'm, like I said, I'm probably about 80 pounds at the time. Like I'm tiny, 85 pounds. This kid gets into me, and I think the weight limit was like 120. So he's probably all about 90 pounds, but he's shorter than me, and he's driving me, and I'm like, up, because I feel my equilibrium coming off, and I'm going down. I'm like, oh man, I'm finna get pulled. My family here we go. I ain't gonna never see the field after this. So the running back, he's solid. Like he's not. You gotta wrestle him down. So I'm like, well, this isn't gonna be good. So he takes me out. I'm going down, but he's driving me. But I'm like, here in my head, like, hey, if he gets past you, say goodbye. Your family, we ain't even gonna be like. I feel like once I hit that ground and I like the play ends, I look up in the bleachers, like they just gonna be vanished, like it's just gone, like that's it, and it's all because of you. And so I'm like, oh man. So I'm like, whoa, I'm gonna at least attempt to get a hand on him and see if I can like pull him back with me as I'm getting drove into the ground. So I'm reaching for him, and he decides like last minute he's gonna cut up field. So he moves back, and he ends up running into my left shoulder as I'm going back. And I'm like, that's not going to do anything. But I don't know if the turf monster got him, but he stumbles and he loses his balance, and he like falls right there, So that was my first. So he ended up, I think, losing yards there. But so the coaches are like, oh yeah, that was like perfect. I'm like, it almost was ugly. But I was able to hold my own from then on. I think I held him to about 40 yards. If he had more, if you ask him and he says he has more, he's lying. If you ask me, I'm just a defensive guy, so I'm going to always give him the under. But yeah, we ended up winning the game, if I remember correctly. I think they threw it, maybe they had like 2 touchdowns through the air, though. They were a pretty balanced team. But we won that game, so that kind of just, whatever question it was going to be that I was or not wasn't going to start, it stopped there. But, just after playing football for 4 years up to that point, I was tired. I was tired of defense. I wanted to, I would get my name called, on tackle. They'd be like tackled by Miles. That was it, versus touchdown by, they get a little bit more excited for the touchdowns, than tackles, So I kind of noticed that, and I'm coming into puberty. And once I get in high school, I'm not. They ain't gonna get the ladies, and school need to know my name, and I think that's always been in me since I saw the trophies, I was like, I want that, I want my name on that, I want to be the best at that, so I was like, well, what can do that, so I was like, okay, football I was tired of. So up until this point, I had been playing basketball, recreational league, the park district, the rec centers. So I was pretty good at basketball as well. And I was probably more suited towards that because I was so thin that, that probably suited me a little bit better. But I was like, okay, I had the experience playing it, but I was like, what'll kind of like set me off the top. All these kids have been playing basketball that I grew up with, and I was like, I need to be able to dunk. You know, the dunks, like even in NBA games, you know, that gets the loudest pops. You do a crazy dunk, you know, it's like I need to be able to do that when I get to high school. So I was like, I got it. That's my new mission. So up until this point, like sports were year round. You know, athletes, we played. We didn't want to be sitting in the house. So I was playing basketball my 6th grade year with me having an older brother. My dad just came to us one day and he's just like, look, I'm not going to have your mom taking you guys to 2 different practices. You know, she got to work. He's like, Miles, you're just going to come up and play basketball with the 7th and 8th graders. I'm like, what? You know, I'm like, how do I get the short end of this deal? You know, like, can I just find a friend, you know, whose parents would take me? Wouldn't that be easier? I didn't know what he was doing, you know, but he was always, you know, so smooth with the gyms and, you know, calculated with it that, you know, I grew to realize he was helping me build my confidence in my game, you know, and I was getting cooked. And I was hoping they when he tried to sign me up, you know, I'm like, please ask for like birth certificate. You know, I was praying that they denied him. I'm like, didn't they just see me last year playing with 5th graders? Like, please don't let me, you know, I had to go against it. And of course, he was able to like talk it into it. I was like, oh my God. So the kids knew like I wasn't in 7th, 8th grade. You know, I didn't know any of the people. You know, I'm like, I'm playing with my friends. Like, you pulling me away from that, you know. But I think he had noticed, like, look, you know, if you want to do this, if you're going to call yourself a basketball player, he'd like to give you the best opportunity to, when you're within your grade age group, is playing with people older than you, you know. And it sucked. I mean, I didn't want to do it. You know, it was, once again, nerve-wracking. You know, it was scary. You know, you like, man, I'm small for, you know, well, I was tall, but I was skinny for my group, you know. I'm like, I'm going against kids with beards. And just back in that time, that's just how it was. The kids, and people from that time know, like, I'm not exaggerating. Like, you was 13. 13-year-olds had, like, beards and mustaches and, you know, stuff like that, were built, you know, 200 pounds. Stuff like, I don't know what it was in the milk. It was just a different time. That's all I can say. But, yeah, the kids are just, it was in that time, you know, and I'm built for today, you know, how kids look today, but back then but yeah, I was out there, I was getting cooked, you know, but the coach started me at like point guard, you know, my brother, I mean, it helped that I had my brother on the team, you know, because we played in the backyard. I was used to playing with that, so that kind of helped, you know, with the unnecessary stress of it all. But, you know, can you imagine being a point guard? You like the leader of the offense. You got to get this play set up. Like, we're running plays. We were running like 94 feet. Like, the court was different than from 5th grade, so more energy getting up and down the court. And now they pressing me because they know I'm a kid, and they could probably knock me over and take the ball. So if I scored, it was like I was pass first for sure. If I scored, it was probably because they were like knocking me over and they felt sorry and gave me a foul, and I could shoot some free throws. But yeah, it was tough. But, you know, in that same frame, it was like when I went against kids my age, you know, the physicalness of them, you know, trying to bump me and, you know, stop me. It was night and day, you know, and it set me up. You know, it forced me to improve on my game. You know, if I was going to start, you know, I had to, you know, improve on what it was that I was doing and make myself a valuable member of the team, so I could pass and I can get the ball to the people. And, you know, I was quick, but you know, it took me really honing in on that because I knew I didn't have the size or anything else to really compete with these kids. You know, they could jump higher, they could do all that. So yeah, it was balling, man. It was just a good time. It was a good time for basketball and sports. You know, it showed me, you know, the different athletes. A lot of the kids from the neighborhood who were on like football teams, they're like the star players in there. They were like now on a basketball court, and you just like all around athletes, you know, it's just different breeds, you know. So I had that experience now going into high school, you know. Like I said, my age group, I felt really comfortable playing with them. I didn't feel like I was outclassed by anybody, you know, in particular. So high school comes, I'm like, oh, I got to be able to, you know. So now the mission is dunking. So I had already known from childhood, like if you're gonna do something, you know, you got to go all in, and it's not it doesn't start when the sport starts. It starts before that, because my dad would always be, before even little league would start football, he was taking me to the track to run. So I already had those building blocks in my arsenal. So I started training myself. So I was jumping rope every day, ankle weights. I'm running bleachers. I'm going to the school, walking to the school, walking back with ankle weights on, running while I'm there, running the bleachers. I'm doing the workouts my dad told me, but I'm doing them like I'm working on my explosion. I'm getting my legs in shape. I'm building up my cardio, things like that. I'm taking a tape measure and putting it on top of like the rim, trying to measure the distance from my top of my hand to the top of the rim, just to see like how high does my vertical need to be, things like that. If I didn't grow anymore, so man, I'm just setting new challenges for myself like every 2 weeks. Okay, I need to be different. Okay, I can touch the base now of the rim. I need to be able to touch the part that the net connects in. Once I got there, I'm like, you're almost at the rim. You need to. Then I started like nipping the rim, and then I finally started like touching the rim, and then grabbing the rim, and now we're like 2 months away from school starting. Right when spring hit is when I started, but now we're like 2 months before school coming back from the summer, and now I'm like touching the rim. So now I had like a little, if you ever been in like the Dick's Sporting Goods or Sports Authority where they had a little palm Nike balls, I had one of those at the house, and I just started trying to like put it over the rim slowly, and then when I could dunk that, it was like right in time for the school year, so I could dunk that little ball. But the regulation ball that we used was going to be a different story. I still had some ways to go. So you start back school, it's still nice out. So I had about two and a half months before tryouts was going to start. So I'm just working on my game. So now I got to like, learn, doing dribbling drills, shooting drills, trying to implement that, as well as like now that I can jump a lot higher than I used to. I'm implementing that, so getting used to like doing things around the rim, just making myself, if I got to play around the rim, I can do it. If I'm still playing point guard how I was when I was younger, I can do that. I'm ready for it. So, these are just all things that, I didn't find valuable until, you found out that they worked out, and in the moment it seemed like it sucked, but I just started to learn to enjoy it. So, and I had a goal in mind, was to dunk. So I was like, this is what it's going to take, and I would look at like around like when I was in 8th grade, we of course had like the internet and stuff. So I would like search like, what did Spud Webb do to dunk? Cause he was like my guy. Like I was like that small, at around that time. So I was like, how did he dunk? So he kind of told us like he would run around the neighborhood with like ankle weights and, things like that. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do that, as well as like jump rope and things like that, work on my agility. So, so we get into the year, and then from literally the first day of school, everybody's talking about basketball. That was the sport, football was like secondhand, but basketball was it. Everybody want to go to the league. Everybody think they can go to the league. And so I'm like, man, and this is the entire school, so that kind of motivated me through it as well. I'm like, it's going to be a lot of people out here, so I need to make sure I stand out, and coming to find out that we didn't even touch a basketball to day 3. I'm thinking like, once they see me dunk, it's over. Well, we didn't even touch a ball. We didn't do a layup line. We would stretch and we'd go out and we ran for the first 3 days of tryouts. So tryouts come around, and if there's 400, maybe 430 kids at that time, then I would say 140 of the guys came out for tryouts. I mean, kids who you knew they couldn't hoop. You got kids who, just coming out because their friends are there, their cousin there. People was like, me and my cousin trying out. Just wasting time. It's like, dude, I know you. Like, what are we doing? But they're just, that was just the thing to do. Nobody wanted to be left out. Everybody thought they were the best basketball player. So, which they should have thought that. But I'm like, okay, well, this isn't going to be fun. So it was brutal, the tryouts. They had us running for like hours, doing wall sits, core. Like, I'm like, are we trying out for the Marines? But what it did, it kind of weaned out the people who were there because their cousin invited them. Their mom didn't get off to 8. So they came to tryouts, people whose heart really wasn't in it, and you kind of see it. You'd be running and they get around the corner from the coach and they stop running, trying to catch their breath, and you keep running. And a lot of times I'd be like, a lot of people didn't get called, but you see that, and you see somebody that ran all the way through and they got cut at the end, and that kind of sucked seeing, because you're like, man, you really gave it your all, but that's kind of like some of the lessons you learn with life. You learn to, who you are when nobody's watching, is your real character. So seeing people who were cheating, sometimes not get caught or make it to the next day or try out, it seemed like those people, they'll always, almost in the end, got, the boot some way or the other, because if they get through that one-way cheating, they're going to try it again, believe it. So, they'd always rightfully get their justice. So it kind of showed you, like, do right and do it right at all times, so, whether somebody's looking or not. It was important that if you said you're going to do something, you did it. You did the actual work to make that happen. You didn't leave it at just the word. A lot of people say, I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to be this. And that's where the work stops. And that's where dreams die. So, yeah, like I said, it was brutal. They were cutting people. They were like, people came in with the wrong shoes on. They were cutting them. They're like, hey, you wearing speed stick today? You go home. You can go home. Have a good night. Breath stink. Hey, man, come on. Get out of here, man. After, I'm surprised I made it, actually. But yeah, it was brutal, man. It was brutal. So the process concludes. I end up making the team, and now it's go time now, so we go through, we're doing like different drills and stuff, so it's just only helping what I had built on. We're doing box jumps and things like that, working on our explosiveness. So I'm enjoying it. And even in the tryouts, it's like I had gotten in such good shape. It sucked still, but it wasn't nothing that you couldn't power through, because I was doing most of it on the regular. So now it's just time to put the icing on the cake and get my dunk. So sure enough, we were playing Bremen High School, and it was funny. One of the players that went to Bremen that I kind of like for football, that I grew up with, he was a really good basketball player. He was in the crowd, so I was like, oh, I got to do it now. So we are playing them, and I get my opportunity. They shot a shot, missed it. We got the board. We leak out, and I want to say I probably contested the shot. So I got back. I was the first one back. They throw it. I get the ball. I look. There's this open court in front of me. So I was like, oh, okay, absolutely. So they give me the ball. And of course, if you guess slow motion occurs, you are correct. Everything breaks down in slow motion. So I'm dribbling. I see everybody in the crowd, and I'm like, man, if I miss this, it's over with. Like everything you worked for is in your hand, literally in your hands right now. I'm like, you could lay it up, because this is a close game. But if you miss, you might as well hang up your shoes. So because the coach is, it's a wrap. So I go up. I'm like, well, make sure if you're going to miss, go all in with it. Like miss good. Have a good miss, that you could kind of blame it on something, That's just my thing. So I jump, and then I dunk it. I come down, and I just act like it's just another day at the office. But, I'm doing backflips in my head. And we finished the game. I don't believe we won. Nobody really said anything, The dunk went in, so the coach couldn't say anything. And we finished, and then I'm like, oh, maybe they didn't. Maybe did I play it off too casually? And one of the kids are like, hey, dude, you dunking now? I'm like, y'all know how I get down, man. Like, y'all seen this before. Even though I probably only made like 50% of my dunks on the layup line, they're like. And then everybody, so once he kind of was the catalyst to that, they started. Everybody's like, "Hey man, teach me how to dunk." I'm like, "Okay, yeah, open up the page." And this is where you want to follow this. This like I'm like, I don't know what stage you are with this, like, but it was just kind of funny because that was like the catalyst to everything. So I go home, I just want to tell my dad, I'm like, "Hey, look, dude, like." I dunked in the game. I'm like, he ain't gonna believe me. He wasn't at the game, but I tell him, he's like, yeah, right, or whatever. You ain't dumb. I'm like, all right. I kind of expected it to go this way. But I get to school the next day, and it's just all throughout the halls. People who don't play basketball, people who were there remember. But it was just like, it was just going through the halls like, oh, man, Miles dunk, right? Dunking. He dunked in the game. And, my favorite part at the time, and 13, 14-year-old at this time. So it's like, and the little girl was like, "Hey, you Miles, I heard you dunked, and this. And when's your next game?" And I'm inviting them all out. I'm like, "Yeah, come on out." The guys, dudes who they, the drug dealers in the hall. I was like, "Hey, man, come through." It was cool then. I was like, "Come through." Yeah, I dunked the next game. I win the next home game. I tell them. And I wanted everybody out there. That was what I worked for. That was it, man. You could say I guess a legend was born. But yeah, man, I was inviting everybody. Bring your auntie too. It's going down the next game. But I think I only had like one more attempt at a dunk throughout the season, because it was just like, unless you an NBA star at that age, unless you rising up over people, you getting your dunks on fast breaks, and unless you cherry picking, you got to stick with your guy, So I wasn't really putting in those opportunities. I think I got one at home, and I ended up missing it. But it was enough for me to be like, all right, look, this is going. Let's keep it moving. So after the basketball season, I was confident. Confidence was there. I knew I had to work, but like I said, you couldn't really tell me much. It's like if I'm not good at it, I'm gonna become good at it if I want it. So I'm telling the quarterback, Davi, shout out to Davi, I'll come in his locker, and telling him like, hey man, next season football is over with. Whatever receivers you got, you had kids who had a pretty good freshman year. I'm coming in, I'm taking over, and I'm gonna lead the team in touchdowns and this and that. And he's like, yeah, all right. And he's probably right, because it's like, we comes to find out we didn't pass the ball like that, but I didn't know. But I'm talking about I'm gonna play receiver. I had never played receiver. I was a defensive guy, so I'm talking about I'm gonna be good at a position that I never played before. Like, imagine I played it in like recess, but to play it, organized, you got to know the route trees and get used to catching the ball. The ball's coming a lot hotter than it is with the lunch lady throwing the ball to you at recess. It's different. So I'm just talking, but I knew deep in the back of my mind, like, I was ready to begin working towards this, So at the time, it may have seemed like I was writing a check. My bank didn't have the funds to cash, but I was going to do what I needed to do to make sure I didn't embarrass myself. I had learned that much enough. So we get to football season. Well, no, basketball season ends. From that January to the summer, I'm in my basement, my family room, doing cone drills by myself, ladders, doing all that, getting my footwork together, learning the routes. I'm writing them out. Then I'm going in the backyard when it's nice enough, when the snow finally melted, and doing the routes, getting used to doing them. I'm having my brother toss me passes, and at this time he had decided he was going into his senior year. He wanted to try his best to get a scholarship to some, but he hadn't played football since 2002. So that wasn't going to be an easy adjustment. You're talking about 10 years later. And so I'm at the place, and I'm at the house. I'm just putting in the work. And I still have a defensive mindset. So I'm like, catching the ball is nothing. I'm like, I usually got to tackle, If any interception really ever went my way, I would catch it, and I didn't really think too much about it. Catching the ball was like simple. So I kind of took that into receiver position, and that helped. But it was definitely an adjustment for me, but I had him. He threw me the ball. Everything went well, and the season comes around, and I'm doing great. I come out there, I'm like, I can't be guarded. Like, my footwork is too good, and nobody's like used to sticking me because I hadn't played the previous year, so I'm routing up everybody, man. It stayed that way though, through senior year, so there ain't much change. If you stuck me, if you're listening to this, that it was just nothing you could do. It was like I'd be out there laughing, telling them what's coming. But so first, and I would still, me being a defensive guy, I still had that defensive mindset. Like, so for the varsity team, they had players, they're big guys. And a lot of times the sophomores either didn't want to tackle them or couldn't tackle them. And I'm like, y'all must want them to slaughter y'all family. So when it was every time for me to tackle them, I would tackle them. I wasn't trying to play defense. I was just like, sorry, my dad left me no choice. Like, I got to tackle you guys. So I would do that. And they ended up, the first game, they're like, we want you to play safety. And I was familiar with the different coverages and, getting in and out of, and, making plays out of the breaks and things like that. And I would also have to like stick the slot receivers a lot of times as an outside linebacker. So it wasn't too, new of a change for me. I just had to, learn that I had like, the freedom to kind of roam, which I really liked. So I was like, this is perfect, and if the ball's in the air, I'm almost like a receiver anyway. So I made the switch there for defense. I was playing defense and offense. So receiver, I'm waiting to get the catches. And then the game comes and, I had like 9 solo tackles from the free safety position. And they may have had me at strong, actually. That's a strong safety position, but we didn't pass the ball, so I was just bored, and I'm like, this is what I signed up for. Here we go again. And so we go into the next game. So that game ends. And I would say if you took rankings right then, I was probably prospected, move up to the varsity team at that point. I had handled myself pretty well, there. They kind of saw like, I could hang at least with the team. At least be like second string player, but, definitely be valuable to the team. And that was kind of all I was trying to do anyway. But going to week 2, practices were Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday were walkthroughs. Fridays are game days. And we get to Thursday. I had a great week. And they actually brought me out to like a second team on the defense as safety for varsity. They were running against a scout team. Now, the guy who I was guarding was a junior. And he's like, he's not starting. So he's trying to, get his name out. He's like a defensive guy. He got reps there, but he wanted to like show he was versatile and he could play receiver if they needed him. So he's trying to do the most. So he comes and runs a drag route in front of me, and I see it and I jump on it because it was like obvious. So I go to like try and pick it off. I'm thinking it's a routine play. Like we're in just our jersey and shorts, just walking through things. I'm like, okay, if I don't get it, then I don't get it. But the ball pops up off my chest plate. If you guess slow motion happened after this, you're an A student. Absolutely correct. The ball's in the air. I go to get it, and the ball, I catch it. I'm coming down, and I see this guy's in my waist pocket. I'm like, oh my goodness. So he tackles me. I put my arm out and to break my fall, and I land on it awkwardly. But adrenaline's going, so it's like, whatever. So I go ahead and for those looking like in my mic, hey, stop hating. All right, my mic stand is on the way. All right, I'm going to get it together. Thank you. But I go to break my fall, and I land awkwardly. Adrenaline's going, so I get up, and I get back into my position, and I'm ready to play. I'm like, whatever. Shake it off. A lot of times in football, you get injuries that just kind of like sting for a little bit, and then it'll resolve. So you don't really pay attention to the pain. But the coach is like, hey, Myles, you felt pretty awkward. Go see the trainer, and we'll get you right back on the field, if they clear you. So I go to the trainer, and they ask me, okay, don't let me put your arm down. So I'm like, okay. So I put my arms up. They push my left one. It doesn't move. They push my right one. Goes straight down with like the most minuscule amount of force. So I'm like, oh, here we go. So so that's pretty much the end of the day. I'm like, I at least got to go in and, have them look at it. So, and this is another lesson with, parents. When they tell you don't go outside with anything you don't want anybody to see you in, believe that. Because, of course, as a high schooler, laundry's the last thing on my mind. So I knew I didn't want to be, like, completely bare underneath my jersey. But I brought, like, the holiest of holy T-shirts that day. The unholy trinity of T-shirts. Like, it was a T-string. Like, I had more skin showing, I think, than I had T-shirt like material. Like, it was like moths had a field day on that shirt. Like, I was holy, man. So of course the trainer, she has to go in there and help me because my shoulder's out. So broken, that I come to find out. But so she comes in the locker room and I really can't feel my arm. So she's like, she helps me get like my jersey off that I was playing in. And I said I like the rib protectors or whatever on. And I was like, I think I could take the rib protectors off. Like, can you just give me a second? I'll be right out. She's like, all right, I'll be here if you need me. Because I think she saw, how bad that condition that t-shirt was in, and she didn't feel like laughing. So maybe she just left me alone. She spared me. But hey, I get other stuff off. I go into the training room, and she's trying to, like I said, it wasn't anything you could kind of like, even then, it wasn't where you can just type in what the symptoms are and find it out, get a diagnosis. So she's like, I think your shoulder just got dislocated. So I was like, all right, I knew about it. I was like, well, it's not going to be fun, but let's see it. What would it got to lose? So she takes my arm and she's like working it, trying to get it in place. And it's not going, it's not locking how she thinks it is. And I think she just gave me like a wad of paper towels to hold on to until the procedure was done. So she's working it, and it's just not coming into place. So she's like, I don't think that's it. And I was like, I wish you would have known that 2 minutes ago, like whatever it was, it's broken now for sure. So she's like, all right, well, you need to go to the hospital. So she's like, I can have you call your mom, or I can call you an ambulance. And I was like, well, she was like, I can have you call your mom. I'm like, well, nah, don't worry about it. My brother, he's playing too. So it was like, I can just wait for him, and then we'll take care of it when we get home. She's like, well, no, that's not how it works. You got hurt here at school, so you can either call your mom or I can call you an ambulance. So I'm like, all right, well, in a rock and a hard. I'm like, well, get in trouble for bothering her, for getting hurt playing sports, because I still got that mindset from a kid. I can't get hurt playing this sport. They don't want me. They didn't want me playing to begin with. How I'm gonna get hurt, and this is the first time I actually got hurt. So I'm still thinking about that. My 6-year-old, 7-year-old self trying to get onto the field, and play and teach them that, that I can play and do it safely. Here I am hurt, so I was still battling that demon, that, I'm like, can't get hurt, I can shake it off. But she's like, no, you can do that, or I call an ambulance. I was like, well, if you call an ambulance, it's no talking my way out of that, if she get that ambulance bill, it's really going to be over. I'm going to have to move out. So I was like, all right. So she's like, I was like, you can call her. I was like, well, can you call her? Because I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with it. I tried to make it like that was important. And she's like, yeah. She's like, I'll call her, because she had knew her from my older siblings. So she calls her, and I hear her on the phone, and she answers, and then she's like, what? I hear her through the phone, man. I'm like, oh my goodness. I'm like, can we introduce an option C where you just take me out yourself? Like, I'll turn around. You just put the bullet in my head, like, just so I don't got to deal with either one of these. I'm like, oh my God, it's going exactly how I thought she would. So, but no, she calmed down, and she's like, all right, I'll be up there to get him. And she had to work that night, man. So I'm just dreading it. So she like walked me to the door. She takes me to the hospital, and she's like, she told my mom, like, if you don't mind, like, I would like come and see like the x-ray, because I'm curious as to what it is. So she actually hung out with us. It took forever for us to get to the back, even though it was the hospital my mom worked at. It took them forever. But at least when she told them she was calling off, they kind of saw why. But yeah, so it ended up that I had a fractured humerus, so that was it. So I had to now, work my way up from there back to, the condition I just try my best to work my way into. But yeah, that was just life, it wasn't nothing to, kind of hang my head with. I hate that I couldn't play, because had so much momentum at the time, but I was able to, watch my guys move up from sophomore up to varsity, and, they played really well. It was funny, because it was like, whenever I was playing, I never was too nervous, because I kind of trusted, I knew what I had did, but watching them as sophomores up there with varsity, and the varsity team was really good that year, watching them play, it was nerve wracking. It was almost like watching a little sibling, it was really like, it was insane, but they held their own. So, I worked my way back, but I would always like come to the games and watch them play. And that kind of was the first time I was starting to get asked questions like, what are you seeing the defense do? What do you think we should do? And that's probably alarming. Looking back on it now, it kind of shows you what we were dealing with that year, because the sophomore team that we had left once everybody went that was going to get pulled went up. It wasn't too good. So the fact the coaches were asking me, I'm just there on the sideline and they're asking me, what do I see? I was like, dude, I'm 10. I don't know, but it kind of allowed me to look at the game from a different point of view, from a strategic standpoint. And it's probably, what helps me as a coach nowadays doing it. But that was the first time I ever looked at it from that side. So versus just like, this guy sucks, throw me the ball. It was kind of more so like, okay, how can I help the team as a whole? Not an individual person, what they can run, what play can we call that works for us, that can help us, excel from here. So yeah, it was definitely an important moment of life. And of course, once I got the all clear, I started back training the best that I could. I started, just really all around. I didn't want my shoulder to come out anymore, so I started lifting weight. So I put on some more muscle. The footwork was going to be there, but I'm catching the ball, I'm extending. I had to make sure I could get to full extension again with the humerus coming out and fracturing. So that was kind of a big emphasis. But I remember in that time the coach asking me, he's like, hey, I was in my sling. He's like, you think you can get out there with one arm? Give us a shot out there. He's like, that we'll take that at this point. But I thought, just hearing that, you kind of understood like where this coach saw me as an athlete and just an addition to the team. So that season ends. The varsity team ended up making the playoffs, but they lost in the first round. So we were expecting big things the next year. Well, our head coach leaves the school. He transfers to a different school outside of the district, and we have a new coach who is a defensive-minded coach. So our play calling was super conservative, but we were, needless to say, a first offense, which is not what Myles signed up for. I wanted to catch the touchdowns and make the big plays to help us win games, and we just weren't the offense that was built for that. So they moved the sophomore coach up, who asked me about my shoulder. They moved him to varsity as just an assistant to help out with the team. No certain positional group at that point, but he's just there to help out. And it was cool because we were cool. It kind of built up a bond over my sophomore year. It was just me being on the sideline and like helping him out. So that year passes. We're run dominant team and we're just not built for it. We don't got enough guys. All our linemen are going both ways, and you got to be we're like an athletically built team. Like, we weren't built to be pounding the ball up the field. We weren't in the weight rooms like that. We weren't built to just be dominating teams, just pushing them back. We just weren't that offense. We were built on speed and athleticism. So needless to say, it didn't work that year. I think we were 5-4. It's respectable. You're over 500. But, our senior year, now you got guys who have been on varsity for 2 years now. I'm going into my second. They're going into their third year. They're expecting big things. We got all the talent in the world. And at this point, I'm hosting my own camps in the off season. I kid you not. I'm bringing out the quarterbacks. I'm bringing out the receivers. Are working on our time, and we're throwing the ball. We think, okay, last season we ran the ball way too much. We're going to finally step away from that and really lean into our talents, what we do best. So that year comes, and they've now made that sophomore coach, who I would be on the sideline with, and that grown with, into a receivers coach. So it should be cake. Now, and we go into the season, and we're working out throughout the year, and it's like, no brainer playing receiver. And we get to the first game comes, and they ask, and I'll preface it like first, like, this guy is not a receivers coach. He's never played receiver in his life. If he played football at all in his life, this is the most unathletic individual. Like, he'd trip and fall getting into bed. Like, he's like the most, you kind of imagine. For drills, we had to throw the ball he couldn't even throw like a football. So I'm like, I'm not even sure if he even played football. let alone like receivers. And why that's important, it's not a knock at him, that was what it was. It's like for receiver, that's like one of the most athletic positions on the field. So you kind of got to understand what it is that comes with the job. That's like you wouldn't apply for a job that you knew absolutely nothing about, that you can't be taught. Like if the job focus is based on experience of doing said job, it's not, you can't just jump in and think it's just going to come because somebody appointed you to it, so this is no different. So with this being one of those positions, it's like he took it on. And I guess necessarily blame him. It was a job, but it was like he wasn't the guy for it. And so we get to the game and they're like, pick your receivers. And he picks two guys. I'm not in the two, pick for his wideouts. We had slots and we had wideouts. I wasn't a slot receiver. I was a wideout. I could play it, but I was a wideout. So he doesn't pick me. I'm like, what's going on? I'm thinking it's like, he's just putting out a front. Like if you put out a front that's just like, okay, just for, just setting up and putting an offense on the field just for like walkthroughs or, just for that particular purpose in that moment. But I was like, so the game, he's like, all right, this is the starters. He's like, this is the starters. And I'm like, no, here we go again. So the game goes on. He's like, Myles, stay close. We're going to switch. You guys are switching series. He's like, I'm just seeing something. So whatever, I had been there before. I'm like, whatever. If we win, it doesn't matter. So the guy did absolutely nothing. I had actually caught a touchdown in those limited reps that first game, so I'm like, all right, that should nip this in the bud, And then we get to the next game and he does it again, and I think I played fewer snaps that game. So now I'm like, all right, dude, what's to it? And I'm at the age now, it's like, I don't need my dad to come talk to you, like I'm like, dude, what are we doing? So we get into practice. I'm like, what's going on? What's the issue? And he's like, you don't want to block. Like you're not, I think you're jogging on the routes. And this is like, has this whole breakdown of supposed stuff that I did. I'm like, nothing has changed. If anything, I'm faster than I was my sophomore year where you were wanting me to go out there with one arm and play because it was going to be better effort than what you were getting from your receivers. I was like, I understand it's a run first offense, but it's like, I know blocking comes with being a receiver, but it's like now all of a sudden, something's changed because you want this guy out here, you want to, and the guy that they took out there, he was a bigger guy. I believe he was like 6'5", but he is like, sure, if you just wanted him out there to block, cool, but he wasn't like putting people on their backside. Like it didn't make sense, and it's like for me to just fall in favor, to him. And I think what it was is that he didn't have that experience as a coach as a receiver, there's receivers like Randy Moss, and I'm not saying that I was him, but really just like technicians at the position, your Brandon Marshalls, guys who just get down the field effortlessly, and it looks like they're not really. Or your Vernon Davis he's like a tight end, but he ran like a 4.3, and it never looked like he was running that fast. It's just like there's going to be different athletes, and I don't think he understood that. He understood he's used to, you got to do all this, and I'm like, dude, I've practiced this route 5 million times. Like I know it's going to look easy me doing it. I'm gonna get in and out quickly, and it's like it may look like for a lack of effort, but no, it's because I put in so much effort into it that it looks easy. And I think he just couldn't, everything that he would do that was a struggle, I made it look easy. But he doesn't understand in that it was because of all the months prior to practice that I was working on that in my backyard and growing up and, things like that. I can't help, I got long legs, so it was just a misunderstanding there, and it's just a disconnect that he wasn't seeing. And the head coach he's defense, so he doesn't know whatever he says goes. So it was going to be a bad season. I know I couldn't leave. My dad was a big cream rises to the top type guy, but it's like, I'm like, dude, I'm in a lose-lose situation here. This guy just doesn't like me. And, he thinks that he mistakes it for laziness. And it's like, it was just a failure. We didn't live up to the expectations. And then that was really unfortunate. If you had the appropriate people in position, we don't know what we could have been as a team, but that ruined it for a lot of people, up until that point, who have been putting in the time and the work. It sucks that the coaching point of view, them being stuck, coach being too stuck in their ways or hell bent on seeing one outcome can affect all the dominoes behind it. So fortunately, as I touched on, it came full circle after basketball season. The coach telling me, you should try high jump because I was dunking. He said, you're a one leg jumper. You should. So this is going all the way back to freshman year. He told me you should do high jump because you jump off one leg and that's not normal. And I said, you can get out of my face. I was offended because I'm like, I'm a basketball player, dude. I'm about to go to the pros playing basketball. Like, what do you mean I can switch over to track? Like, I felt like it was an insult. Like, maybe you're not good enough, So I was taking it as a challenge. And he's like, no. He's like, don't look at it like that. He's like, that'll get you in shape for any other sports. He's like, but you can give it a try as well. And I remember from like middle school, I would always be like top of the board when it came to like high jump in my class. But I was like, I'm not doing track because I just felt like you had to run. And I'm like, I'm not trying to run. I'm not that fast, especially not at that time. So I'm like, I'm not trying to be racing people. This is crazy. And wearing spandex. Like, cool, I'm cool, So he's like, just give it a try. So I went out for a week. I went for a week straight. And we were getting hazed by the seniors and, all this stuff. And I would come and I would do these workouts. And after every day they took attendance, I would give them my name. And, they would never call me. They were like, whose name did I miss? I'd be like, mine. And I'd tell them, I'd spell it for them. The next day we come, not on the list, not on the list, not on the list. And I'm doing these things. And I'm like, all right, you guys. Like, I'm like, all right, I see how it is. You're not taking it serious. You're not taking me serious, So I'm going to take my talents to South Beach. I'm cool. I'll just go home and work on my homework. I was like, I just got through with basketball anyway. Like, I'll take a break. But fortunately for me, I had friends on the track team. And they're like, try next year, don't worry about that, come back. So I came back. I didn't play basketball actually the next season either. Because that freshman year, what I didn't tell you is that I played the small forward position. So I was the 3. And I'm like 5'10", but like basketball, you got some, you're on the box, so at least defensively you are. So I would be like in between the 3 and the 4, small forward and power forward. And that was just strictly because I could jump. But you had kids who were just a lot bigger. You had, Mount Carmel had these football players, their linemen would be down there. They're about 240, 250. I'm about $140, 100-pound difference there, So you just realize really quickly with basketball, like outside of my school, we're a good basketball school as well, but it's like you realize like it's levels to it. And when you get to school called Thornton, and I remember in the layup lines, they were like throwing the ball across the court, and the players were catching it, looking in the rim, and like flushing it without like even touching the basket, like throwing it through, like you see Ja Morant do, like. And I was like, and of course, tip off comes, and that's who I'm lined up against, and I have to stick, and they're like 6'4", and they're a freshman, and just jumping out the gym. So I was like, yeah, my little dunk, that's not gonna hold up, And I didn't foresee myself growing 6 inches or anything like that. So I was like, yeah, basketball may not be for me. It may be just a recreational thing for me to do. But so I didn't come back that next year. So sophomore year I hadn't played anything since I had hurt my shoulder. So I was like, I was just trying to get back in shape. Football was still top of mind at that point. So track was the way to go. And I went out and I told them, they got my name. And I told them, I wanted to try out for high jump. That's what my coach said. I'm like, I know I don't want to sprint. And I thought I wouldn't have to sprint if I just was like, I'm a jumper. Come to find out, that's totally false. But, at the time I told them that. And they're like, okay, And they didn't have a high jump coach. So, but they had the equipment. So they're like, all right, well, let's see. I told them I'm a high jumper. Every time they had workouts, I'm like, I'm a high jumper. They're like, oh, you still got to run. So I had to do that. But one day they finally put the equipment out. It was like buried in this back room from like the 50s probably. They pull it out. The thing's old school. You gotta like, crank it and lock it in place, and it's got spider webs on it. And I'm like, when the last time you guys like practiced? But they pull it out, and I go ahead and high jump. And they're like, okay, I think the first time I jumped, I got like 5'8" maybe. And it's just like, I'm jumping like I did in like middle school, just like no form, just Fosbury flopping over it, kind of. And they're like, oh, like you got it, So once that kind of like stuck, I knew like, all right, this is what I'm doing. I need to learn how to high jump. So I just became a student again, just like I did switching to receiver, just like I did trying to figure out how to dunk, just falling in love with the process of getting to the point of where I wanted myself to be with the position I was in. So I became a student. I learned how to high jump, the proper form, the workouts, the exercises. Before I knew it, I was coaching as a sophomore. I was on varsity as a high jumper. There was like one senior that was jumping with me, but I was like coaching and, instructing. And from then on, my remaining 3 years I was coaching. But yeah, I went to conference champion, ended up getting a scholarship, to college for that. But yeah, it all started, just from a kid, having to, prove myself, work on myself. And, I didn't have the, I would say, it was there, and probably because I was always a few pounds lighter than I should have been, I was able to navigate, putting in the work and the original challenges that, they may have presented themselves, and, finding a way to fit in and, become the best version of myself. So yeah, and it's just, not putting all your eggs in one basket, pretty much. Playing all those sports growing up, you kind of got to adjust it to doing different things. You got good at different things that you're put in, and you didn't want to cheat in the process. So you learned what it was you needed to learn in order to, make yourself valuable and not be the sinker to the team. And I think that's kind of lost. So I always, when I'm coaching, I always try and, bring that out of the kid, whatever it is that they need, whatever they specialize in, what's their skill, finding that, cultivating that, putting them in the best positions. I think a good coach always does that. And that's what my basketball coach did. He and my little league coaches and my father, they found out what it was I was good in. They put me in different tests and situations to, see how it was. Was it for me or was it not? After putting in that work, do you still suck? Maybe the sport isn't for you. If you put in that work and you excel, how do you keep building on that, to make the most out of it? And that was what I did with track. I took something that I didn't want to do, but I saw that if I actually worked with it and took it serious and put the time into it, that it could pay off. And it definitely opened doors, especially with, at the time when it was time for me to go to college, my parents were paying for my brother to go to school. So they weren't going to be paying for both, so I had to figure it out. So track was like my last option. And if I wasn't, there were meets where like track coaches for like college coaches that came to see me specifically. And, if I hadn't been put in those situations early on, it was like I had to prove myself and, work through that pressure of like, okay, look, I put my name out there for you, my track coach. What's different from that than my dad telling me, I told the coach, give you a shot. This is it. It's do or bust. And same with track. He's like, look, this coach wanted to come see you. I told him come see you at this meet. Show out. So I was used to working in that pressure. But if you're not exposed to it early on, it could be crippling. That type of the nerves and things like that. So that's why I'm always, people who know me, I'm always so calm and collected in situations. But it's because I've been in these types of situations and circumstances early on, so I'm very, very well adapted to that. And it just kind of made me into who I am today. And I just hope to pass that off to the next generation. I think that's all we can do. Like my dad and my coaches, and although the support system around that got me to that point. But one athlete is never they're never the product or result of their own actions. It's always somebody that made an impact and kind of helped steer them in the direction that they needed to go. I helped build them those building blocks to make them want to strive to go above and beyond what it is that's expected. And that's what kind of makes a legend. So I think that's enough talking today, but kind of what I just wanted to end the story with was that if you're a coach out there, or looking to be a coach, like my parents showed me earlier, keep emotions away from these sports. Do what you need to do behind the scenes, do your job while you're on the field, and live with the results. Don't go into it emotional. Don't go into it because you don't like a kid. If you know it'll benefit the team, you're the adult. Be the adult. In that situation that I talked about in the car, my dad was the adult. You're a coach. You're supposed to lead your team. You were showing me, like, look, in situations where things may not make sense or you may be wanting to react illogically, think it out, track and map out the best course of action, and make the necessary adjustments. And that's the coaching point of view in everything, I think. So yeah, don't go into it with, if you're going to have a bias or you're coaching because you want your son to be the guy, well, make sure your son's the guy, and if not, you're here to make kids better. Why not make your own? Don't ruin it, because ultimately what you do is you water down the game. You ruin the game for a lot of athletes experiencing it for the first time. Maybe their parents aren't at every practice to monitor it like mine. You go tell the parent, they're just not ready, and it's like, it's not the case. And that's not what these sports were built on. That's not the foundation of it. It's always been the best people should be out there on the floor. It should be the best people at the job that are, getting accepted. It shouldn't be any cookie points because of, who so because that ultimately catches up with you in the end. So I would just say that, we need more coaches, but we need more good coaches, because I know too many stories of athletes out here who game has just been ruined for them. They stopped playing the game, or they didn't want to proceed and help the sport grow because they had such a negative experience with it. So if you're going to do the job right. And that's with anything in life. So I just want to thank you guys for listening to me this long. Thank you for tuning in to the Letterman Legends podcast. We appreciate you guys so much. And if you like today's episode, please leave us a review in the comments. A like would do a lot for us. But yeah, that's the pilot story. Stories are going to differ from athlete to athlete. I'm sure you'll have some that just had smooth sailing because they're just so good, and that's the way it should be. You go into the right program, you don't have to experience the politics side of it. But I think this is important to begin the podcast with, because these experiences are going to differ, and I just wanted to show another side of the sport, but ultimately show that keeping on, with the process, putting in the work, and doing the right thing always ultimately pays off in the end. So I am Chris Myles. Thank you guys again. Hope you have a great holiday, and we'll be back with another show. So tune into that. But until next time, you guys take care. See ya.